'Cause I got time while she's got freedom. 'Cause when her heart breaks, no, it don't.
Season 20. I've seen dreams come true right where you're standing.
When Jourdan Blue fell to his knees in a storm of golden confetti on the America's Got Talent stage, millions saw the birth of a star, but almost no one knew what he had survived just to make it there. That moment, glowing with applause and tears, looked like the climax of a dream. In reality, it was the final chapter of a nightmare. Behind the pitch-perfect vocals and trembling gratitude was a man who had once slept in fast food bathrooms, sung for coins on Bourbon Street just to buy diapers, and walked through violence so raw it nearly silenced him forever. AGT gave the world a headline: Golden Buzzer, Emotional Story, Redemption. But what they didn't tell you, the truth they didn't have time to fit between commercial breaks, is the real reason Jourdan's voice carried that kind of weight. It wasn't just heartbreak or talent, it was survival. A rebellion against a childhood that felt like a prison. A plea for a second chance from the only man who'd ever shown him unconditional love. A performance built on a foundation of trauma, loss, and the brutal daily fight to stay alive long enough to be heard. And when the confetti fell, it wasn't a celebration, it was proof. Jourdan Blue had already lived through the kind of story reality TV doesn't know how to tell. But once you hear it, you'll never hear his voice the same way again. Jourdan Blue didn't grow up on the streets or in chaos. He was raised in a home filled with discipline, rules, and expectations, the kind of structure most people would assume creates perfect citizens. His mother was a police officer, his father a respected lawyer, and together they enforced not just law in the community, but order in their home. From the outside, it looked like an ideal environment for success. Strong values, clear boundaries, no nonsense. But for Jourdan, that world felt more like a pressure chamber than a safety net. The constant demand for obedience, perfection, and performance left no space for vulnerability or self-discovery. He wasn't just the son of authority, he was its prisoner. And deep inside, rebellion wasn't a choice, it was a reflex. When he told the AGT judges with a sly smile, "My mom was a cop, my dad a lawyer, so naturally I became a rebel," they laughed, but it wasn't a punchline, it was a warning label. Beneath that one-liner was a truth he had lived for years. The more people tried to control him, the more he fought to break free. He didn't hate his parents, he just couldn't survive inside their version of perfection. That tension, the need to escape from an identity that was handed to him before he could speak, planted a fire in his chest that would later become his voice. But before he ever stood on a stage, that fire nearly consumed him. And as the years went on, the boy in the uniformed household started slipping into a version of himself no one recognized. Not his parents, not his teachers, not even Jourdan. What came next was the kind of fall no one expected from a straight-laced kid with a badge and a briefcase in the family photo, and it would land him in places no son of law and order was supposed to be. The descent wasn't instant, but once it began, there was no safety net. Jourdan didn't just run from structure, he fell straight into survival. What started as late nights out and ignored phone calls turned into full-blown isolation. By the time he realized how far he drifted, there was no turning back. The doors that once opened freely at home had slammed shut, and pride kept him from knocking again. With nowhere left to go, Jourdan found himself in a reality most people fear but few understand: homelessness. Not the kind romanticized in tear-jerking montages, but the raw, dirty truth of sleeping in bathroom stalls and praying no one noticed him curled up on the floor of a fast food joint he'd once worked at. He wasn't chasing a dream then, he was chasing a warm place to crash. Some nights, if he was lucky, a friend's couch gave him a few hours of rest. Most nights, it was whatever corner he could find that didn't smell like hopelessness. And through all of it, there was one thing he refused to let go of: his voice. No matter how cold the night or how empty his stomach, music stayed with him. Sometimes he sang just to distract himself from the growling in his gut. Other times, he sang because it was the only thing that reminded him he was still alive. It didn't pay the bills, didn't solve the pain, but it gave him one thing that had vanished from his life: purpose. And in the darkest hours, when every part of him whispered to give up, that voice, fragile, wounded, but still burning, kept him standing. He didn't know it yet, but someone was about to reach out and hand him more than a meal or a bed. They were about to hand him a second chance, and it would change everything. Just when life had stripped Jourdan down to the bone, no bed, no stability, no faith that anything would ever get better, a hand reached out from the past, weathered but steady. That hand belonged to Grandpa John, a quiet man with a soft voice and an old soul who didn't ask questions or demand explanations. He simply opened the door. Jourdan didn't walk into a mansion or some miracle music studio. He walked into a modest home, faded with time but filled with something he hadn't felt in years: safety. The air smelled like dust and vinyl, the walls lined with vintage records, gospel, blues, soul, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, voices soaked in struggle and redemption. And in that space, surrounded by the crackle of old speakers and the hum of a record player that never quit, Jourdan found something he didn't even know he needed healing. Grandpa John didn't preach, he played music. He didn't say, "Get a job," he said, "Press play." For the first time, Jourdan wasn't being judged or corrected. He was being seen. Through the stories woven into each vinyl groove, he discovered music not just as a sound but as survival, every lyric a lifeline, every note a therapy session. It wasn't about performing, it was about remembering who he was before the world broke him. Slowly, cautiously, he began to sing again. Not for crowds, not for coins, but for himself. And in that rebirth, in that quiet sanctuary of rhythm and warmth, Jourdan began to believe that maybe he wasn't broken, just bruised. Maybe he still had something left to give. That belief would follow him into the pews of a church, and later, into a spotlight he never imagined he'd step into. Inside that quiet house filled with vinyl wisdom and second chances, Jourdan's voice began to rise, not in clubs or talent shows, but in the one place where pain meets praise: church. It started simply, timidly, just a few hymns here and there, his voice echoing through the pews like a soft reminder that he was still here, still breathing, still fighting. But something happened in those stained glass walls. As he sang, the pain didn't vanish, but it shifted, it transformed. What once weighed him down now gave him wings. People began to listen, not because he was perfect, but because he was raw. Because when Jourdan sang, you didn't just hear the note, you felt the wound behind it. That connection fueled something deeper, and soon he found himself drawn to the theater stage, where storytelling and soul could live side by side. High school productions became his new home, places where he could become someone else for a while, shed the weight of who he had been, and step into a role that allowed him to be loud, messy, powerful. The applause felt good, the spotlight even better. But it wasn't about fame, it was about release, about finally having a space where emotion wasn't a liability but a weapon. Still, even with the stage under his feet and a mic in his hand, the dream of turning music into something more felt impossible. Bills still piled up, trauma still loomed, and confidence, despite the cheers, was fragile. So, he pushed it down, called it a hobby, and carried on. But deep down, music had already laid its claim, and when the world shut down and silence spread across the globe, Jourdan wouldn't turn to fear. He'd turn to a melody that had been waiting inside him all along. When the world froze in 2020 and streets emptied like scenes from a ghost story, Jourdan didn't panic. He went inward. With theaters dark, churches locked, and jobs drying up overnight, the silence was deafening. But where others saw a void, he saw a blank page. Stuck at home, surrounded by uncertainty, Jourdan did the only thing he knew how to do. He sang. He poured years of hurt, hope, failure, and fire into his phone's tiny microphone, writing songs that didn't beg for attention but bled honesty. They weren't polished, they weren't perfect, but they were real. And when he posted them online, he expected silence. Instead, he got a response. People didn't just hear him, They felt him. The views climbed. Comments poured in. Strangers called him brave, said his voice helped them get through their own storms. For the first time, the thing that had always saved him, music, was saving others too. That unexpected ripple caught the attention of someone watching from the sidelines. A producer from American Idol. In 2022, Jourdan auditioned for season 20 through a Zoom call, a strange pixelated performance that lacked the energy of a live crowd but still carried his soul. He didn't make it far. His performance never even aired. But instead of breaking him, it did the opposite. That quiet no sparked a louder yes inside him. If producers saw something in him, something worth a call, worth a shot, maybe he was closer than he thought. That tiny opening cracked the door he'd once believed was sealed shut, and once he saw that sliver of light, he didn't retreat. He ran straight through it. The next time he sang for strangers, it wouldn't be in a living room or a Zoom call. It would be on the concrete streets of New Orleans, microphone in hand, every note sung not for applause, but for survival. Most people think chasing a dream means studios and spotlights, but for Jourdan Blue, it meant standing on the chaotic sidewalks of Bourbon Street with a microphone in one hand and the weight of fatherhood in the other. After American Idol passed him over, he didn't crawl back into the shadows. He went louder, rawer, and more vulnerable than ever before. He packed up what little gear he had, just a portable speaker, a mic, and grit, and drove 90 minutes from Baton Rouge to the heart of New Orleans, where streetlights flickered and music fought with madness every night. He wasn't there for fame. He was there for diapers, for gas, for rent, for his baby son Jax and the girlfriend who stuck by him when the world didn't. Every dollar that hit the bottom of his open case meant food on the table, not a new song on Spotify. He performed from dusk until dawn, his voice bouncing off brick walls and bourbon-soaked pavement, sometimes dodging cops, sometimes dodging drunks, always dodging the voice in his head that told him to quit. It was brutal, it was thankless, and it was the closest he'd ever been to breaking, but he kept singing, even when his voice cracked, even when his body gave out, because every note wasn't just a melody, it was a lifeline, a declaration that he was still standing. And night after night, as tourists threw beads and strangers stopped to listen, Jourdan forged himself in fire. His voice grew stronger, his resolve hardened. He didn't know it yet, but this daily grind in the trenches would do more than pay the bills. It would prepare him for the one moment when everything would hinge on a single song, and it would all begin with a tragedy that nearly stole the music right out of him. Bourbon Street had always been chaotic, but Jourdan knew its rhythm. The flashing lights, the staggering tourists, the clash of horns and voices, but nothing prepared him for what happened in January 2025. One night, on the very block where his voice had become a fixture and his feet had etched grooves into the sidewalk from so many midnight performances, violence erupted. It wasn't just a scuffle, it was a full-blown attack that shattered the illusion of safety in the one place Jourdan had found purpose. Though he wasn't physically harmed, something inside him cracked. The pavement he sang on was now stained with fear. The notes he once belted out with confidence suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable, exposed. When he later stood before the AGT judges and said, "At the beginning of the year, there was an attack right on the exact block where I perform," his voice trembled not from nerves, but from memory. He had looked death in the face without even realizing it, and in that instant, life sharpened. It wasn't just about dreams anymore. It was about legacy, about making sure his son had something more than trauma in his bloodline. The realization that everything could be ripped away in seconds forced Jourdan to ask himself a brutal question: if he vanished tomorrow, what had he really left behind? That was the breaking point. The moment he stopped waiting for permission and decided to crash through every barrier. He wasn't going to sing on the sidewalk forever. He was going to take one final shot at being heard, really heard. And this time, it wouldn't be on a street corner. It would be on one of the biggest stages in the world, where millions would finally see the man the sidewalks had built. When Jourdan Blue finally stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage on May 27, 2025, The audience saw a calm young man holding a mic, but what they didn't see was the storm behind his eyes. They didn't see the bathroom floors he'd curled up on. They didn't hear the echoes of Bourbon Street still ringing in his chest. They didn't feel the weight of a near-death experience still clinging to his skin like smoke. But all of it, every scar, every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer came pouring out in one raw, trembling, unforgettable performance. His song of choice, Break Even, by The Script. A track about loss, heartbreak, and trying to hold it together when the world falls apart. But Jourdan didn't just sing it, he lived it. Every line cracked like glass under pressure, every note stretched with desperation and soul. The crowd fell silent, then erupted. Mel B called it pitch perfect. Sofia Vergara said he was a rock star. Simon Cowell praised his authenticity. But it was Howie Mandel, stone-faced, misty-eyed, who felt the truth under the performance. He didn't hesitate. He stood, slammed the golden buzzer, and in that split second, time stopped. Golden confetti rained from the ceiling like a baptism, and Jourdan dropped to his knees, cradling it in his hands like a man holding proof that the universe finally said yes. On FaceTime, Grandpa John watched it all, tears matching his grandson's. The world saw a stunning debut, but for Jourdan that stage wasn't a beginning, it was a finish line for every moment life had tried to silence him. In that brief flash of gold, Jourdan wasn't just singing anymore, he was rewriting his story. And yet what made it even more powerful was this: long before AGT gave him a stage, he'd already built one of his own, and people had already been listening. Long before golden confetti fell on national television, Jourdan Blue had already become a quiet force online, building a community one song, one live stream, one brutally honest post at a time. His covers, raw renditions of Take Me to Church, Dancing on My Own, Too Close, spread across TikTok and Instagram like wildfire, not because they were flashy, but because they hit people where they lived. His voice wasn't just technically good, it was haunted, healing, human. By the time he stood on the AGT stage, he had over 369,000 followers on TikTok, 46,000 on Instagram, and thousands more who tuned into his live streams just to feel a little less alone. He wasn't just a singer, he was a lifeline. A voice for the broken, the anxious, the ones hanging on by a thread, and Jourdan knew it. He'd been there. His pain wasn't filtered, it was out in the open, shared with fans not as followers, but as fellow survivors. That authenticity, that refusal to pretend, became the bedrock of something much bigger than a music career. It became a mission. Jourdan began speaking openly about mental health, using his platform to push for suicide prevention and emotional wellness, not in vague hashtags, but in specific, heart-cutting conversations. In interviews, he shared his dream of launching a music festival focused on mental health awareness, blending soul, storytelling, and therapy in one place, not just for fame, for healing, for those who never got the golden buzzer. And through all of this, his reason never changed. Everything he did, every post, every dollar, every song, was for his son, his girlfriend, and the grandfather who saved his life. Because Jourdan knew something most stars forget: the bigger the spotlight, the more it should illuminate someone else's darkness. And as his name grew, so did his promise to never forget where he came from, or who still needed to hear the music he almost gave up on. As of June 2025, Jourdan Blue's journey on America's Got Talent is still unfolding, but in every way that matters, he's already won. Whether or not he takes home the grand prize, he's secured something far more elusive: validation, purpose, and a voice that no one can ignore. The same man who once sang for coins on cracked sidewalks now commands millions of ears across the globe, not just because he can hit high notes, but because he hits deep truths. Industry experts estimate his net worth between $75,000 and $150,000, a modest number, but one that hardly reflects the value of a man who turned trauma into testimony. To his fans, Jourdan isn't just another singer chasing a label deal. He's the guy who got knocked down over and over and still showed up with a mic, a mission, and a reason to keep going. And while the industry debates his commercial potential, Jourdan keeps his focus where it's always been, on his family. His son Jax is growing up with a front row seat to resilience. His girlfriend, who stood by him through silence and struggle, now walks beside him under spotlights. And Grandpa John, the man who handed him a record player and a roof when the world offered nothing, continues to watch with pride as Jourdan rises. But the real legacy Jourdan's building isn't measured in dollars or downloads, it's in the lives he's touching, the stigma he's breaking, the community he's forming from the pieces of his own survival. The boy who once thought his story didn't matter is now teaching others that every broken verse has value. And while the world watches to see if he wins AGT, Jourdan is already planning what comes next: albums that heal, festivals that matter, and a future where no one has to suffer in silence. Because his story doesn't end with a golden buzzer, it begins with the sound of someone finally, truly being heard. America's Got Talent showed you the confetti. They showed you the smile, the stunned judges, the trembling knees, the golden moment that made headlines. But what they didn't show you, what they couldn't capture in a neatly edited segment, was everything that made that moment matter. They didn't show you the bathroom stalls where Jourdan Blue hid just to sleep. They didn't show the miles he drove each night just to keep the lights on, the notes he sang when his voice was hoarse from hunger, or the fear that crept in every time he walked past the spot where someone almost died. They didn't show you the tears shed in silence, the dreams deferred by poverty, the quiet hands of a grandfather who believed in him when no one else did. Because this wasn't just a performance, it was a resurrection. A moment built not on fame or luck, but on the kind of struggle that most people don't survive. Jourdan didn't chase fame, he ran from pain. And in that run, in that messy, heartbreaking, brutally human run, he found something more powerful than a stage or a trophy. He found a voice, a real one. The kind that can't be auto-tuned, can't be faked, can't be forgotten. And now that the world is finally listening, the question isn't whether Jourdan Blue deserves the spotlight. The real question is, how many more voices like his are still out there, still unheard, still standing in the shadows, waiting for someone to care? Because behind every golden buzzer, behind every song that makes you feel something deep in your chest, there's a story that was almost never told. And this time, it finally was.